At a federal courthouse, a calm black woman walks through the front doors, ready to start her workday. But the security team doesn't recognize her. And they don't just question her, they humiliate her. They detain her, take her to a back room, and there they shave her head, laughing, each stroke stripping away her dignity. What they don't know is that this woman holds more power than they could ever imagine. And her silence? It isn't surrender. It's the stillness before the storm. Before we dive in this story, let's know where you're watching from. We love to hear your thoughts. It started like any other morning in Lexington, Virginia. A cold breeze rustled the leaves of the oak trees lining the courthouse plaza as the sun rose, casting long amber shadows over the steps of the Lexington Federal Building. The city hadn't fully awakened yet. Just the murmurs of distant traffic and the sharp rhythm of heels clicking against stone. Judge Imani Rhodes stepped out of her silver Toyota Avalon, adjusting the collar of her deep navy coat. Her breath came out in soft puffs in the chilly air. She held a slim leather case in one hand, her walk steady, unhurried, deliberate. Her silver curls, tight, neat coils that framed her face with quiet pride, were pulled back just enough to show her calm expression, her jaw set, her back straight. She didn't wear her robe outside the courtroom. Never had. That was her choice. She believed in entering buildings as a citizen first, not cloaked in power but rooted in presence. She approached the main security checkpoint like she had hundreds of times before. The metal detector buzzed low in the background. A young woman scanned ID cards silently. A man in a blue uniform adjusted his belt, checking a clipboard. But then, there he was, Deputy Colton Briggs, mid-40s, broad-billed, weathered face, the kind of man who looked like he'd been doing this job since before half the interns were born. And he had that look in his eye, cold, sizing her up as if she was a problem, not a person. The moment she stepped forward, he moved in. "Ma'am," he said, voice already annoyed, "I'm going to need you to step out of line." Imani paused, just for a second, scanning his face. "Is there a problem, officer?" He didn't answer at first. He looked her over, head to toe. The silver coils, the smooth skin, the tailored slacks, the expression that didn't flinch. Something about her unsettled him. Maybe it was her calm. Maybe it was that she looked like she belonged. In his world, that had to be corrected. "No ID visible," he muttered. "You think you can just walk up in here dressed like some fancy lawyer or something? Not how it works, sweetheart." Imani didn't react. She reached into her coat slowly, pulled out her federal judiciary badge and held it up. The badge caught the light, but Briggs didn't even glance at it. He snatched it from her hand and slipped it into his pocket without asking. Her tone didn't change, but her eyes sharpened. "I'd like that returned." He stepped closer. His breath carried the scent of stale coffee. "In a hurry to get somewhere, sugar?" His voice was quieter now, but the malice clung to every word. The younger guard by the X-ray belt shifted awkwardly. She had noticed the tension, but like so many, she stayed silent. Imani stayed composed. "I need to get to a courtroom." Briggs cut her off with a scoff. "Then you'll follow my procedure." His words snapped like a whip. "Random checks. Let's go." Before she could reply, he grabbed her arm, not hard enough to bruise, but firm enough to show he could if he wanted. He led her away from the line, down a quiet hallway, past the echoing shuffle of courthouse foot traffic. The door they entered clicked shut behind them with a mechanical thud. The room was small, windowless, one metal chair in the middle, a stainless steel cart with scanning tools beside it, and on the corner, a pair of electric clippers. Imani's heartbeat quickened, but she kept her voice even. "I do not consent to this. You have no cause to detain me. This is unlawful." Briggs stood near the door, arms folded. "You're acting suspicious," he said, not even pretending to justify it. She didn't sit. She didn't move. He stepped closer again. "You think flashing a little badge means something? Not in here, not with me." Two more officers entered. One was a tall man with a shaved head and nervous eyes. The other was younger, holding the back of the chair. Imani raised her voice slightly. "This is a violation. I want all your names, right now." No one answered. Briggs picked up the clippers and flicked the switch. The low buzz filled the room like a warning. "What are you doing?" Imani demanded, stepping back. "Standard protocol?" he sneered. "You could be hiding something in that curly little mop." She tried to move, but the officer behind her shoved her toward the chair. She didn't scream, she didn't struggle. She clenched her fists and sat, chest rising and falling slowly. The clippers touched her scalp. A thick curl slid to the floor, then another, then another. She stared ahead as pieces of herself, of her history, her dignity, her identity, fell in silence. Her breath caught once, her eyes burned, but she didn't let them see that. One of the officers muttered, chuckling, "Looks better already. Should have come in here without that damn attitude." Briggs smirked, brushing stray hairs from his uniform. "Now you look like someone who knows her place." Imani didn't move, but her words came back sharp and clear. "You'll regret this." He leaned in. "Yeah? People like you always say that. Then walk off like good little girls. That's how it goes." He opened the door, nodded lazily down the hall. "Courtroom's that way, ma'am. Don't be late." Imani stood, slow and steady. She retrieved her badge from his desk without asking, slid it into her case and walked out. Her heels clicked again, but this time each step felt heavier, not with shame, but with fury. Controlled, channeled fury. The kind that doesn't explode, it builds. She didn't look back, because in less than 10 minutes the man who cut her hair would be standing in the back of a courtroom watching her take the bench, and when he realized who she was, it wouldn't be with a bang. It would be with silence. And it would be louder than anything he had ever heard. The hallway outside courtroom 3B was quiet, almost too quiet for a morning like this. Imani Rhodes walked with slow, measured steps, each one echoing faintly off the polished marble floor. Her scalp still tingled from the clippers, raw patches stinging slightly where her curls had once curled proudly. Now uneven tufts remained, a silent testimony to what had been taken from her. She didn't reach up to touch it, she didn't pause to adjust her collar. Her expression stayed locked in place, calm, unreadable, cold, not from anger, but from absolute clarity. Two clerks stood near the side entrance. One looked up, opened his mouth as if to speak, then thought better of it. The other glanced away entirely. They had seen her earlier, dragged away, disrespected, her hair falling in spirals on a tiled floor, and now here she was, walking the same hallway like nothing happened. But everything had. The main courtroom doors loomed ahead. Inside, a high-prefaced hearing was moments from beginning. Commonwealth vs. Lexington Police Department. National eyes were watching. Civil rights groups, press, victims. It was meant to be a routine evidentiary hearing. Until this morning. Imani paused just outside the doors, exhaled slowly, then pushed them open. Conversations died instantly, pages stopped turning, heads swiveled, and for a breathless moment the room forgot how to breathe. The woman they had seen escorted through the hallway like a criminal, the one with the exposed scalp who moved like she had nothing left to lose, was not a witness, not a bystander. She was the judge. She walked the center aisle, past rows of attorneys, plaintiffs, defendants, journalists. Some stared openly, some blinked in disbelief. A few shifted uncomfortably in their seats, unsure whether to look or look away. Her heels struck the floor with quiet authority. She reached the bench. Her robe was folded neatly across her chair. She had left it there the night before, as always. Waiting. Imani didn't wait for a bailiff. She didn't signal for help. She picked up the robe herself, unfolded it with both hands, and slid it over her shoulders in one smooth motion. It settled against her back like armor. Across the room, standing stiffly near the side door, was Deputy Colton Briggs. His uniform was crisp, his face pale. When their eyes met, he froze. His mouth opened slightly, like he might say something, but no sound came. She didn't look away. "Is the docket ready?" she asked the court clerk without turning her head. The clerk stammered, "Yes, Your Honor." Imani nodded once, then slowly lowered herself into the chair. The bench creaked softly beneath her weight. She looked straight ahead, expression unreadable. We will begin with preliminary testimony on case number 487L, charges of excessive force, civil rights violations, and abuse of power. All parties present. A round of soft affirmations followed, scattered and uneven. Lawyers were shifting. Some glanced at each other wide-eyed. Others stared down at their notes, guilt creeping across their faces. But no one said a word. Imani's voice remained level. Proceed. The prosecutor stood, called the first witness, a retired Army veteran named Joseph Banner. He took the stand with a limp and a brace around his wrist. He described what happened the night of the protest, how he had stood on the sidewalk holding a sign that read, "Justice is patriotism." He described the moment he was shoved to the pavement by Officer Darren Voss, how he felt his ribs crack, how he begged for help and was told to stop faking it. Imani listened. She didn't interrupt, didn't raise her voice. She took notes with careful strokes of her pen. Occasionally, her gaze flicked to the defense table, where the officers in question sat with stony faces and tight jaws. From the corner of her eye, she saw movement. Briggs. He was fidgeting now, one foot tapping, hands twitching near his belt. The man who had cut her hair was shrinking by the minute. And still she said nothing. After the second witness, a young woman describing how she was pushed face first into a patrol car for recording the police, Imani called for a brief recess. The courtroom emptied in quiet waves. Whispers floated through the air like smoke. Even the attorneys spoke in hushed voices, as if afraid to break something sacred. Imani stayed seated. When only her clerk, 2 bailiffs, and Deputy Briggs remained, she finally spoke. "Deputy Briggs." He froze mid-step. Her voice didn't rise, but it hit like a hammer. "Step forward." He swallowed hard. "Yes, Your Honor." He walked slowly to the center of the courtroom, each step like a sentence waiting to be served. "State your full name for the record." "Colton. Colton Briggs." "How long have you served as a court security officer in this courthouse?" 18 years, he said, voice cracking slightly. Imani tapped her pen once, twice, then set it down. "And in those 18 years, how many women have you physically handled without cause?" Briggs blinked. "Excuse me?" "You heard me." He glanced toward the other bailiffs. No one moved. I don't know. I didn't realize." "That I was a judge?" she cut in. He nodded quickly. "Yes, ma'am, I swear I didn't know." "And if I hadn't been?" Her voice was sharp now. "What then? Would this have just been another morning where you dragged another black woman into a side room and shaved her down like a threat?" He opened his mouth, closed it. Imani leaned forward slightly. Her tone was calm, but every word landed with precision. 12 complaints, 12 official complaints filed against you in this building, all dismissed, all buried, because no one had the power or the title to make them stick. Until now. Briggs didn't speak. His hands were trembling. Imani stood. "Effective immediately, you are suspended from this courthouse. Formal charges are being submitted to the Department of Justice. You will be escorted from this courtroom in handcuffs. You will not be placed in general population. You will not wear that badge again, and you will answer fully for what you did, not because I am a judge, but because I am a citizen, and this is my courthouse too." She turned to the bailiffs. "Escort him out." Briggs backed up one step. Wait, you can't." But it was already over. The cuffs clicked shut. He was walked out the same way he had brought her in, without explanation, without dignity, without control. No one clapped, no one cheered, but something had shifted, something quiet, something final. And Judge Imani Rhodes remained standing at the bench, unblinking, unbroken, and unafraid, because this wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. The courtroom had changed. Not in its structure. Its walls were still the same faded ivory, its ceiling fans still creaked slightly every few turns, and the tall windows still let in cold shafts of fall light that sliced across the polished floor. But something else had shifted, something invisible but unmistakable. It was in the air now. A weight, a tension, a reckoning that settled across every seat, every table, every person who remained. The space no longer felt like a room for procedure. It felt like a room holding its breath. Judge Imani Rhodes sat at her bench, silent, shoulders back, eyes steady, but inside the storm had begun to churn. She had not flinched when Louis Bryant spoke, when he stood in the back with his hat clutched in trembling hands, when he told the court how Briggs had broken his ribs for raising his voice. How the system had told him he tripped. She hadn't allowed her face to break, but the truth of it hit her like a slow, relentless tide, swallowing every moment she had once believed in quiet progress. And when more hands began to rise, hesitant at first, then steady, Imani felt the room shift again. They were standing not for applause, not for attention, but because the silence had finally collapsed under the weight of its own injustice. Sandra Kerr, still seated in the witness chair, looked around at them, at each face that stood now with trembling chins and wide eyes, and something behind her own expression softened. She wasn't a woman used to speaking loudly, years in records, always behind a desk, always organizing the chaos that other people created, but in this moment she realized that her silence had never been harmless. It had cost people. It had protected the wrong ones. Her chest tightened as she looked at Judge Rhodes, silently asking for forgiveness that words couldn't hold. And when Imani nodded just once in return, it wasn't approval. It was understanding, mutual and heavy. In the back, Louis Bryant didn't sit down. He held his spot, spine straighter than it had been in years, as if the courtroom had given him something back. A piece of his manhood, his dignity, something that had been taken in the flash of a badge and the crack of bone against a wall. The young bailiff near the side entrance, no more than 24, shifted his weight awkwardly. He had stood silent that morning, watching Briggs drag Judge Rhodes into the screening room. He hadn't said a word, hadn't even looked her in the eye. Now, watching her sit there with the authority she had never raised her voice to claim, he couldn't look away. Guilt sat on his chest like a stone, not because he had acted, but because he hadn't, and deep down he knew silence was its own kind of violence. The clerk, Jasmine, stood near the bench, papers in her hand, knuckles white around the folder she held. Her pulse was racing. She had grown up idolizing Judge Rhodes, seeing her as the unshakable symbol of what justice could look like when a black woman took the bench. But today, seeing her exposed, stripped, and still rise, Jasmine felt her throat close with something she didn't have a name for. Reverence, maybe. Rage, definitely. And pride. Fierce, protective pride. Then the knock came. It was sharp, intentional. The kind that doesn't wait to be invited twice. Imani didn't move at first. She glanced at Jasmine, who nodded and turned to open the courtroom's side door. The man who stepped in wore a gray federal suit that still held the morning's chill in its seams. He was tall, clean-cut, a face built for composure, but even he looked slightly rattled as he walked forward and stopped before the bench. "Judge Rhodes," he said, his voice low, urgent, "I'm with the Office for Civil Rights. We've been tracking developments since this morning. I've been instructed to inform you that as of this hour, the Lexington Federal Courthouse is now under federal review." He held out a sealed envelope, hands steady, voice smoother than the gravity of his words. Imani took it without speaking. The weight of the paper felt heavier than it should have, as if it already carried a verdict. "Title 18 violations," he continued. "We have video footage, witness statements. What happened this morning isn't being treated as misconduct. It's being classified as a potential civil rights violation at the federal level." Jasmine inhaled sharply behind him. Sandra Kerr closed her eyes, just for a moment. The man shifted his weight slightly. "This will move quickly. I'd advise you to brace for media, political inquiries. There's chatter already, national outlets. Some names in the Senate are watching." Imani's fingers gripped the envelope tighter. She looked up at him, expression even. "Start with the ones who buried the complaints," she said. "Start with the supervisors who promoted Briggs. Start with Judge Barrett, and don't stop there." The man nodded, almost relieved, as if he had come expecting hesitation and instead found resolve. He added almost as an afterthought, "the footage from this morning? It's viral, it's everywhere now. CNN, MSNBC, Reddit, Twitter. It's not just a Lexington story anymore." Imani didn't blink. "I didn't do this for them." He paused, then smiled. "That's why it matters." And just like that he turned and left, the door clicking shut behind him with finality. The room held stillness again, but it wasn't the quiet of before. It was different now. It was the stillness of something about to break wide open. And for the first time since sunrise, Judge Imani Rhodes allowed herself a full breath. Not relief, not triumph. Purpose. Pure, unwavering purpose. The sky over Lexington turned gray by early afternoon, not the soft gray of a lazy day, but the kind that warned of rain and something heavier behind it. Inside the courthouse, the hallways buzzed with quiet urgency. More reporters had arrived, more observers, more silent stares. But Judge Imani Rhodes didn't notice the outside noise. Not yet. She was seated in her chambers, her robe draped over the back of her chair, the sealed envelope from the DJ still resting on her desk like a live wire. Her scalp, still tender from that morning, itched beneath the breeze from the overhead vent, but she didn't move. Her reflection stared back from the darkened window pane, bareheaded, exposed, unchanged in some ways but transformed in others, and she was thinking, not about the morning, not about Briggs, about what came next. There was a knock, 2 soft raps. Her clerk, Jasmine, poked her head in, her eyes still carrying the shock and weight of everything that had unfolded. "Judge," she said, voice lowered, "Reverend Hill is here, says he won't stay long." Imani didn't reply immediately. She just gave a small nod, then stood as Reverend Marcus Hill entered. His presence filled the room, not because of his height or his stature, but because of the stillness he carried with him. A man in his 60s, gray beard full, suit slightly worn, eyes that had seen far too much to be surprised by anything anymore. He didn't speak right away, just looked at Imani. Really looked. "You all right?" he asked. Imani gave a quiet, breathless laugh that didn't reach her eyes. "Define all right." He nodded like he understood completely, because he did. Then he stepped closer and held out a folded sheet of paper, the edges soft, the ink slightly smudged. "These are names," he said. "People who came by the church after seeing the news. Some are victims, some are just ready to talk. Some have stories like yours, or worse. They said, if you're ready to hear them, they're ready to be heard." Imani took the list, her hand brushing his just briefly. The names. There were so many, scrawled in different handwriting, ages next to them, contact numbers, a few notes in the margin. One said, "He made me take off my headscarf. I never came back." Another, "My son, 2009. I still have the medical bill." She swallowed, the pressure behind her eyes building, but she pushed it back. "Thank you, Reverend." He gave a small nod. "We've got your back. Whatever happens next, we're with you." When he left, the silence returned, not hollow this time, but sacred, and in that silence Imani made a decision. 30 minutes later, the courtroom doors opened again, but this time she didn't wear her robe. She stepped into the room in a simple black blouse, her posture the same, her authority unchanged, but the symbolism unmistakable. No robe, no armor, just herself, scarred, exposed, standing. The room rose as she entered. Not because a bailiff told them to, but because they wanted to, because they had seen what she had endured and still she came back. Jasmine followed close behind, holding a small binder against her chest, like it carried more than paper, like it carried resolve. Imani reached the bench, stood behind it, and didn't sit, not yet. She looked across the courtroom, at the plaintiffs, the defense, the gallery of ordinary people who had lived under silence for too long. And then she spoke. "This courtroom has endured a violation," she began, "not just this morning, but for years, in its walls, in its silence, in the way some people were seen and others weren't." The room was silent, still, listening. She held up a manila folder, clearly labeled. "This," she said, "is a policy proposal I am enacting, effective immediately within this courthouse, and recommending district." She paused. "Let them see it. It is called the Rhodes Reform." A few pens scratched, a few heads tilted, but no one moved. "It will require bias training for all courthouse personnel, psychological screening, anonymous reporting channels, annual public oversight evaluations, and a zero-tolerance policy for discriminatory conduct by any employee, officer, or appointed official under this jurisdiction. The defense attorney, the one who had tried to disqualify her earlier, shifted in his seat. He didn't interrupt this time. Imani continued, "I will take this to the district council, to the circuit, to the Senate if I have to, because what happened to me should never have happened to anyone. And I will make sure it never happens again." There was no applause, but the atmosphere was charged, like the moment before lightning strikes, when everything holds its breath. "And let me be clear," she added, "this is not about revenge. This is about responsibility, about the duty we have to the truth, even when it's uncomfortable. Especially then." She glanced at the gallery, at Jasmine, at Sandra Kerr, who had remained in the back, standing now with a hand pressed to her heart. Imani's voice lowered, not in weakness, but in command. "This courthouse will no longer be a place where power hides behind procedure. We are not here to preserve the illusion of justice. We are here to deliver it." And only then, only after every word had settled, did she return to her seat behind the bench. Jasmine placed the folder beside her. And the next witness was called, but no one forgot what had just happened. Because Judge Imani Rhodes had done more than take back her courtroom, she had redrawn its lines, and made sure that this time they included everyone. By the following morning, Lexington no longer felt like the same city. The storm had passed in the night, but the streets were still wet, shining beneath a low silver sky. The air was thick with something that felt like aftermath, like memory. And, on the courthouse steps, a quiet line of people had begun to gather. Some held signs, others just stood, waiting, watching, not shouting, just present. Inside, the building pulsed with tension. Reporters moved quietly through the halls, phones buzzing in their palms. Clerks whispered behind file cabinets. Even the security staff, what was left of them, spoke more softly than usual. It wasn't fear that held them, it was awareness. The kind that didn't go away after a headline, the kind that settled into the bones. In her chambers, Judge Imani Rhodes stood at the long mirror, staring not at her reflection but through it. Her hair had begun to grow back in stubborn patches, uneven and unbothered. She ran her fingers across her scalp, soft now, scarred, but no longer unfamiliar. The robe hung behind her, waiting. But she didn't reach for it, not yet. There was a knock. Jasmine entered without a word. Her eyes were different now, not with doubt, but with something steadier. She held out a fresh file. "They're ready?" she said. "Closing arguments." Imani took the file, flipped it open, skimmed the notes. "Any movement from the DOJ?" "They've finished interviews with the last 4 witnesses. They'll file charges against Barrett. Sandra Kerr's testimony was enough, and the Rhodes reform has already been adopted by 2 neighboring districts." Imani gave a small nod, absorbing it without pride, just purpose. "Good." As Jasmine turned to go, she paused. "Oh, and someone from the White House called. They want to speak with you directly. It's something about recognition." Imani didn't answer right away. She just smiled faintly. "Tell them I'm busy." When she stepped into the courtroom, it was full, so full that people lined the back walls, sitting on windowsills, standing shoulder to shoulder just to hear. Law students, grandmothers, city workers on break, former defendants, churchgoers, and somewhere near the front a teenager with a shaved head looked up at her with wide, serious eyes. That small nod passed between them again. A silent understanding. Imani moved to the bench slowly, but with no hesitation. The room stood before the clerk said a word. She tapped the gavel once. "Before we proceed," she said, "this court would like to enter into record several final notes." She signaled to Jasmine, who handed her a new folder. This one thick, labeled in bold. Complaints reviewed. Violations confirmed. Recommendations filed. This file includes every complaint previously suppressed regarding Deputy Colton Briggs. It also contains the names of every official who signed off on their dismissal. Those names have been sent to the Department of Justice, the State Bar Association, and the Senate Judiciary Committee. There were no objections this time, only stillness. The defense may argue that my experience compromises my ability to rule impartially, she continued. But I would argue the opposite, that speaking this truth, makes me more qualified than ever to understand the weight of justice. She looked to the defense table, to the attorneys who once smiled at her with polite indifference. They didn't smile now. And this courtroom is not just a room of judgment, it is a place of reckoning, of repair. She leaned slightly forward. We will not pretend silence is neutrality, not anymore. She called for closing arguments. They came and went. Clean, predictable, necessary, but what followed was not. At the rear of the courtroom, the side door opened and a pair of officers led in Colton Briggs, now in federal custody. No uniform, no badge, just the orange jumpsuit, his hands cuffed in front, his eyes hollow. He didn't look at the crowd. He looked at her. Imani didn't blink. Mr. Briggs, she said, voice even, this court sentences you to the maximum penalties under federal law. 6 years for abuse of power, 5 years for violation of civil rights, 1 year for obstruction of justice. She paused. But that's the legal part. The room went still again. Here's the human part, she said. You spent 18 years deciding who was worth dignity and who wasn't. You used fear to control, silence to protect yourself. You saw people as problems instead of citizens, but today you are no longer protected by your badge, or your silence. He looked down. You will serve your time not as an officer, not as a symbol, but as a man accountable for his actions. She nodded once. Take him. As the officers led him out, no one clapped, no one cheered. They just watched, quiet, breath held, not for vengeance, but for truth. When the door closed behind him, Imani looked to the gallery. This courtroom will no longer be a fortress, it will be a mirror. She stood. And it begins now. That evening the courthouse emptied slowly, like people didn't quite want to leave. Conversations continued on the steps, in parking lots, outside sandwich shops and news vans. And on her way out, Imani walked without her robe again, coat wrapped tight against the chill, scalp bare under the fading sun. A woman in her 70s approached with slow, cautious steps. She wore thick glasses, a church hat clutched in her hands. I never thought I'd live to see someone like you do what you just did, she said, voice trembling. Imani took her hand. You lived it. I just had the microphone. Behind her, a teenager from the courtroom, the same one with the shaved head, walked up, hoodie pulled low. No words, just a look. Then she pulled the hood back and stood tall. Imani nodded. And that was enough. That night, Imani stood on her porch, the house quiet behind her. Her phone buzzed endlessly. Headlines, interviews, messages from cities she'd never even visited. But she let it all wait. The sky was dark now, but she could still feel the light in her chest. The next morning, when she stepped into the courthouse again, things looked the same but felt different. Eyes met hers now, some lowered with guilt, some lifted with respect. A janitor gave her a quiet fist to the chest. A young officer nodded once and looked away fast, cheeks burning. And when she entered the courtroom for a routine custody case, something happened that had never happened before. Everyone stood, without instruction, and waited. Because justice didn't just have a voice now, it had a face. And that face wasn't asking for permission anymore. It was leading.